What's going on, everyone? I hope you're having a great hunting season. So before we dive into this video, I want to touch on one thing real quick. This is a reminder to YouTube that I am 18 years old, and that means I am complying with all community guidelines, and there's no reason this video should be restricted or taken down or any of that sort. So without further ado, we're going to jump right in. I hope you enjoy it.
Good morning. Well, I came out to the back side of this bedding area. This is a spot that my family has spent quite a bit of time in, but this is actually my first time hunting this specific spot this year. Right behind me here is this big bedding area. It's a couple hundred yards across and a couple hundred yards wide. And I'm on the downwind side of it. The wind is pulling like this. And I'm hoping a buck will cruise the back side of this, checking all the trails that come in out of here. Because he could pretty easily walk from that patch of timber over to this patch of timber and just check all the trails. So that's the hope for this morning, and hopefully he'll just come right by here. It's going to the downwind side, goddammit. That was exciting, man. That was super exciting. When I first got in here, I actually heard like a coyote yip a little bit back behind me. And then sure enough, about an hour into the scent, I looked behind me, and right at the kind of start of that cover over there, saw a coyote coming in, just sniffing around. And he got to like 100 yards, and so I started squeaking with my mouth. And sure enough, he totally noticed it and started looping to the downwind side. You know, of course they're going to do that. They're going to come to the downwind side, of course, but he came right into the downwind side and got all the way to 40 yards right behind the stand, and then just got my wind. So that was cool, and I'm hoping if a buck shows up and we call to him that he doesn't circle to the downwind side, because I would hate for that to happen with a deer. Pretty cool though. This is nuts, man. My dad's hunting with me. He's over at a ladder stand like 200 yards that way. And sure enough, about 3 minutes ago, I heard a shot go off. So I was like, okay, great, we're in business. So then another shot goes off. I'm like, okay. And then another shot goes off. I'm like, okay. And then like just a minute goes by, and then another shot goes on. And then like 10 seconds after that, another one just went off. So there's been 5 shots. So I don't know what is going on over there. he's either just missing every shot he's taking, or his gun's not shooting straight or something. I'm gonna try to call him, and then we'll work our way over there and see what happened. Oh, he's running. Here we go, boys. Holy, I just heart shot him. Just heart shot him. Holy shit. Holy shit. know if I was hit. I just shot a buck. Oh my God.
So this is the point in the video that I'm going to jump in. I want to talk about what has happened in the video so far and what happened after I took this shot at the buck. So as a reminder, like I said in the video, my dad was hunting with me. He was hunting with his rifle out of a ladder stand. And he was about 300 to 500 yards, somewhere in that range, maybe about 400 yards away from me. And he had a buck come by mid-morning. And so the buck's coming through and he takes a shot at the buck and he misses the shot. And so he keeps shooting and he shoots 5 times at this buck like I showed there in the video. And so he was pretty confused on what was going on, and after talking through it and spending a lot of hours replaying what's happened between me and him, we have kind of both agreed that the most likely situation, given that the buck was only at 35 yards and that he's hunting with a rifle, the only possible answer is that there had to be brush in the way for these shots as he's taking the shots, because a few days after this hunt he went back to the range and he set it in his rifle and it was completely dialed and he was hitting perfect. So we went back and we looked at what happened there, and we kind of agreed that there was probably brush in the way and those bullets were being thrown off. And so not necessarily all those shots may not have been thrown off, but they at least were not hitting in a vital area. So he takes the shots at the buck, and now the buck is walking out into the field, moving north. And I am set up northeast of my dad, and so that buck comes out into the field that I'm sitting on, and sure enough, I see him, right? That's when I first saw him. And so then I rattled him, and obviously I called him in. And so this buck was clearly not phased. And at the time, I didn't realize it, but the buck that my dad had just shot at and the buck that I ended up shooting at were the same deer. And so that deer, completely unfazed. As you can see in the video, there was no limping, nothing like that. And so he comes all the way into 4 yards. And so for me, I've missed a lot of deer in my short 4 years, and last year there was an encounter I had where I missed a doe twice high at 7 yards, and so out of a tree stand again, you know. And so I wanted to make sure I didn't miss high. So this time I chose an aiming point on that deer that was a little lower down, right, kind of right at the crease, pretty much aiming for the heart. And so as I'm coming back to full draw at 4 yards, you know, I picked my spot. I felt really good about all my sequences, you know, everything that I needed to do to make sure I was going to hit accurately. And when it comes down to it, that arrow was just a little low from that aiming point. And so, as you can see on the screen here, my aiming point was about here, this red dot. And where my arrow hit, as we can see when we slow the footage down, is right at the base of the belly. Pretty much on that bottom line. And so, that's only about an inch or two. And in terms of traditional archery, being off an inch is normally, you know, I would say if I got a 1-inch group, I'm more than ready to be hunting. That's not going to really matter if I'm an inch off to me. And so that just goes back to me and my process of realizing that I need to always be putting my aiming point, where I'm picking my spot, at being dead center in the deer, so that if I'm off in one direction a little bit, I'm going to still be hitting vitals. Because if I had chosen an aiming point mid-body, that would have been a dead deer every day of the week. That was a very tough lesson for me in learning that I need to just continue to aim in the correct spot so that I have more margin of error around where I'm hitting. But that being said, I still missed the deer. And so essentially, my dad and I meet up, and a lot of excitement's going through us. We're talking about what happened with him, we're talking about what happened with me, and so we tracked the buck from where he had shot him, and at that point we still were not 100% sure if it was the same deer or not. And so we tracked the buck, and sure enough his tracks led out into that field, and we followed it around to where it had come by me, and we realized it was the same deer. So now we're kind of like, what is going on? Throughout that whole sequence from where my dad had shot to where I had shot, we found 1 drop of blood. And that was, you know, kind of just like, looked like meat blood. And so only 1 drop of blood, and that was about the actual area that he had walked was probably 300 yards. So then we come to where I had shot the buck, and from there, there's no blood immediately, and then about 15 yards into the trail, we start picking up some drops of blood. And we follow very little, minimal blood for probably maybe 75 yards, and there was maybe a total of 20 to 30 drops, and none of them were a lot. It was always just single drops that looked, you know, kind of what you're seeing on here on the screen. They looked almost like lung blood, but they didn't have bubbles in them, so it almost just reminded me of kind of meat blood. And then after that, we lost blood, and I ended up following this deer's tracks for the next 3 or 4 hours. I grid searched this whole bedding area that I was hunting on the edge of, and then as well I followed his tracks, which led out of the bedding area and into the field across, and they eventually led all the way out into the secondary field, at which point I lost them. At that point, out in the field, there was a lot of deer tracks, and it was just very difficult to follow that buck's trail throughout all the different tracks. And so I was feeling very discouraged at this point. So after, looking for that buck for several hours, we decided to call it a day and come back home. And so then when we got back, we spent a lot of time looking at this footage and just kind of analyzing where my arrow had hit, how the buck was looking when he was coming in to see if he was injured. And it just left a very bad taste in my mouth, feeling like I could have done better. And so there were some tough lessons to be learned from this experience. But I said I'm not going to give up. I did and do believe that at that point that deer was still alive. I don't think that shot that I put on him was a fatal shot. If anything, if I did hit the deer, it was just very low to the belly. Maybe like that broadhead just sliced the bottom of the belly and drew some blood. But at the end of the day, I did not put a fatal shot on this deer. So I decided I wasn't going to give up, and I went back out to the same spot a couple days later, and I hunted again. And for the point of this explanation, I'm going to just kind of narrate through what happened on this hunt, because I think it'll make more sense for the viewer this way. So I went out, I got into a stand location that was very close to where I had shot the buck from, but it was a different tree. It was about 100 yards to the east of him, still on the edge of that field. And so I got in there, it was tons of snow on the ground, and got in the stand, and mid-morning I looked out across the field, and there was 3 does coming across the field. And I watched them feed and walk across the field for a little while, until they eventually went back into the timber. And so then at that point, I was just about getting ready to go. It was about 9:45, 10 a.m., and I had to get back to the house because my dad had some meetings to do and we had driven together. And so right as I'm starting to put gear away, I look out in front of me, and this same buck that I'd shot at and my dad had shot at is running towards me, and he's probably at 25 yards. And so I am just like, what is going on? So I had the main camera in one arm, and I was trying to put it away, and luckily my bow was in my other hand, so I dropped the camera on my backpack, and I put my finger on the string, and he's walking towards me, and he's head on, he's about 15 yards, and I just cannot believe this deer has not seen me yet. And I didn't have a whole lot of cover in the tree. And so sure enough, he comes by, and he stands kind of quartering to at 10 yards, and that's not a shot I'm going to take, quartering to. And so he turns, and he's turning now, he's broadside at 10 yards, and I'm just like, this is my opportunity. And so right as I'm getting ready to pull back, I'm like, don't mess this up. You got this. Just choose mid-center on the body, your aiming point, and just take your shot. And right as I'm getting ready to come back to full draw, he glances up at me, snorts, and runs off. And that was a very disappointing encounter because obviously I didn't get the shot off. But it was very rewarding to see that it was the same deer and that he was completely fine. And that was what I felt most great about this encounter. I know for 100% certainty that's the same deer. When I saw him first at 4 yards, and when obviously we looked at that film, I kind of memorized what his antlers looked like and what his body looked like. So when I saw him again a couple of days later, I was able to identify it was the same deer. And he was completely fine. He was running towards me. And at the end of the day, it was very disappointing that my dad and I did not harvest this deer and that we wounded him, but that is part of hunting, and you're going to have to live with the fact that not everything is going to go 100% according to plan, and that's just part of hunting. So, some good lessons from this hunt. So, this was the hunt, and I hope you enjoyed it. Some tough lessons for sure, but it was a very exciting one. My dad ended up filling his tag on a doe in the same spot, and he put a perfect shot on her. He heart shot her at 50 yards, so he redeemed himself, which he felt great about. I did not get another chance this season. I ended up hunting for a couple more days in a few other spots, but never had it come together. So that was a kind of the final big hunt that I had throughout November. And looking ahead, I have one more chance. In a couple days here, the season's going to open back up for a bow, and I'm going to have 9 days to go out there with my bow and try to fill my tags. So I'm going to be looking forward to trying to fill tags during that season, but I appreciate you guys sticking all the way through this video, and best of luck to everyone out there still trying to fill tags, and I hope you all have a great rest of the hunting season. We'll catch you in the next one.